Good morning everyone and welcome to Coventry. My talk is From Hero to Zero and it's talking about how we might reboot Coventry in the future. As you drive up the A45 towards Coventry from the south, you see a sign to Baggington. You don't usually go left, but imagine this time that you do, and you drive through a corner of northern Warwickshire that eventually takes you to the Lunt Fort. And that's where my story about Coventry begins. The Romans arrived here around about 60 AD, about 100 years after Julius Caesar landed in England. Its primary purpose was to support the northern territorial expansions that the Roman army wanted to achieve. At this time, what is now Coventry was part of the old Forest of Arden, with plentiful supplies of oak and natural resources. And to the south, in the Feldon area, there was plentiful high-quality land where arable products and livestock could be kept and the food for the Roman legions could be developed. At this time, that was about all that was needed to survive in that world. Plus, of course, it was useful to have a little bit of knowledge about military might and how to survive in challenging environments. The Romans stayed here for many hundreds of years, and as was their way, they built lasting infrastructure that had massive long-term impact. And like everywhere that the Romans conquered, by the time that the empire collapsed, England went into a period of fairly dramatic decline, as nobody else could match the technological and scientific skills that the Romans had. Then during the 8th century, the Saxons moved into Warwickshire and made good use of the remaining Roman legacy. They started mixed economy farming, and over time, the beginnings of a prosperous wool industry started, and Coventry was back on the map. Christianity was a very important part of that society, and monasteries and convents followed, bringing advanced civic structures and leadership, which this provided a platform from which further development could take place. By the 12th century, Coventry had its own castle, a symbol of power and success, but this wasn't to last, as 100 years later it had gone. However, by that time, a vibrant and successful trading community had emerged, and the city that we now know had started to take shape, aided by its central access. Coventry continued to grow and prosper, and over the next few hundred years, we saw glass making, agriculture, timber harvesting, textile manufacture, and other things, all generating wealth and actually making Coventry into a prosperous city. By the time of the Peasants' Revolt in the 14th century, Coventry was one of the largest cities in England. It had its own town walls, to protect its houses, its shops, and its marketplaces, and it had its own mint where it produced its own currency. This was clearly a sophisticated and vibrant society, and one that was the leading light in both England and Europe. Moving forward then to Tudor and Stuart times, things started to go backwards a little bit. For much of this time, Coventry stagnated and growth slowed. This was arguably caused by strong guilds, restrictive practices, the inability to expand behind the city walls that were there to protect the people. But in reality, the challenges were much deeper, as seafarers opened up new worlds, creating new markets, new opportunities and new competition, both at home and overseas. Political instability was caused by Henry VIII and the dissolution of the monasteries, and of course after that the English Civil War, which ended in the beheading of Charles I and the end of monarchical rule. Reflecting, Brexit isn't really that much of a challenge. Sometimes the legacy of success is complacency, and those with vested interest don't want to change, and they often resist that change. And I think that there was some ingredients of that taking place too. However, by the mid-17th century, the home-based silk ribbon weaving industry began to flourish and grow. And over the next 200 years, this became the bedrock of the economy and the major employer of the city. Later, factories were developed with larger machines in, some of which could be seen in the museum now, which were sold and products were sold globally. Eventually, though, cheaper imports again began to come in and this industry began to decline. But already a new technological sector had begun to appear, and that was the English clock and watchmaking industry, which was based in Coventry. And I remember going round Hillfields in the 1970s and looking up at the watchmakers' houses before they were knocked down and seeing the big workshop windows that were needed to provide the natural light to perform intricate tasks of making watches and clocks. This was a fragmented home-based industry with brilliant craftsmen, engineers, technicians and salesmen. They sold their products internationally, and Coventry preceded Switzerland as the world leader in watchmaking. But by the early 20th century, this industry too went into decline as new competition came, but again, another generation of industries had begun to emerge, and that was in the transport sector, a sector that was to make Coventry the envy of Europe. By the end of World War I, Coventry had created the largest cycle industry in the world, and the expertise gained in mass production led easily to the manufacture of motorcycles, cars and tractors throughout the 20th century. And of course, these skills and knowledge were used to support the war preparations in the late 1930s, a consequence of which the city was carpet bombed in 1941. Overnight, the grand old city was zeroed, leaving little that didn't need rebuilding. The remains of the old cathedral, of course, can be seen today. So after 1945, the city had to be totally redesigned and rebuilt, and simultaneously reshaped and rebooted. It soon became one of the biggest and most modern car manufacturing cities in the world, making it the Detroit of the UK. However, again, this success was not to last forever, as global competition struck. Newly developing nations were able to design better cars cheaper and more efficiently. The engineering expertise and skilled workforce that had so long provided competitive advantage to Coventry began to be less important, as was the innovation in manufacturing processes that started to look dated. And for the ensuing 40 years, Coventry has been relatively in the doldrums. But, as we've seen, it's happened before, and it's always been able to pick itself up, and it can do that again. So in a few moments, we've seen that Coventry has a long history of change based on the twin forces of success and failure, but it's always been able to move on. The keys to this were innovation, inventiveness, ingenuity, imagination, and investment, built into the culture and psychology of the people. It's always the people that eventually rise to the challenges and come up with the solutions to the situation of the day. And as King Canute found, it's impossible to resist the force of the tide. The ability to adapt, to adopt, both physically and mentally, are critical to surviving and thriving. This infers working in new and different ways, and this can be challenging, and it creates winners and losers. And the key to success is to provide sustainable advantage through nurturing and harvesting the talents of the people. History demonstrates that to survive in difficult times, imaginative civic and political leadership are critical to navigating the unknown. One of the major challenges that we now face is that the regions often have fewer large anchor organisations with which to make decisions. This consequently reduces the capacity and capability to provide the consistent visionary leadership that we need. We often talk about knowledge-based economies and economies of knowledge, perhaps implying that the modern era is the first to think in this way. Yet we know from history that Minoan, Roman, Greek, Egyptian, Aztec and many other civilizations have been fantastic at creating and applying new knowledge to add value to their societies and cultures. But what has changed is the speed of change. What used to take a decade, century or millennium can now happen in days, months and years. And that creates a huge new challenge in the way that we do things and design solutions. Too often our procedures and systems are over-engineered and outlive their usefulness. A quick digression to dinosaurs, or rather their extinction. Their strength eventually became their weakness. Their end was fast, ugly and uncompromising. They became extinct because they were inagile, unadaptable and inflexible. Put simply, they became unfit for purpose as their living environment changed. For dinosaurs today, potentially think of our large anchor organisations and businesses of tomorrow, and that includes our universities. Arguably, they should adapt before they actually need to, but it's not easy to persuade modern day leaders to change drastically if it's not an immediate imperative. However, the biggest can and do fall the fastest and the hardest. Remember Nokia, Blockbuster, Hoover, VHS, Enron, Toys R Us, Woolworths, and the list goes on. They went from hero to zero very quickly. In 1851, Cardinal Henry Newman asked a question as the Industrial Revolution was progressing: what is the idea of a university? Up until then, the purpose of a university was to support theological learning and the training of clergy and priests. Behind the question, what he was really asking is there now a more important role for our universities? As the population shifted from the countryside to the town, and as work moved from fields into factories, and as new communications opened up new markets far away, he was asking whether universities themselves needed rebooting. Fast forward 170 years. Are the same questions not as pertinent now as they were then? We have moved via periods of industrialisation, through automation to digitisation, all with equally profound social, economic and political effects. New ways of doing things disrupt the old, and at alarming speed. And it's entrepreneurs using innovation as their primary tool that ruthlessly exploit those moments in time. They rapidly assess the new environment, looking to provide new solutions to existing and old problems. Current challenges, including ageing populations, economic and political migration, social and economic inequalities, broken democratic processes, global warming and the consequential environmental damage, to name but a few. These are not only the issues of today, but very much those of tomorrow. And we need enterprising and entrepreneurial people to find successful solutions to those problems. These won't be easy nor painless. I would argue that we need to do much more to nurture and develop these change makers. As Einstein commented, if we do what we've always done, we'll get what we've always got. And that becomes a really big problem if that doesn't work. Our universities and colleges can and do play a role in this already, challenging conventional wisdom and orthodoxies and creating new models. But as ever, there's more they can do. And that includes new ways for identifying, encouraging, developing and nurturing those that might have an idea where it can make a difference. And it doesn't matter where they come from. Age, class, culture, gender and educational attainment should pose no barriers. Coventry has two big and very successful universities, Warwick and Coventry. Both are shapers, influencers and leaders, and in many and in complementary ways. Combined, they have 70,000 students currently in the city, and they have millions of alumni. These are potentially underused assets, and both could play both direct and indirect roles in regenerating Coventry. In their midst could be entrepreneurs, both social and economic, and other highly enterprising people. And there will be those that have already found success who might advise, mentor and support those that are up and coming. Somehow, a modern university needs to be available as a connector for life, building mutually supportive intergenerational bridges, the glue that holds complex components of modern society together. We need to give local people hope and realisation that they can influence and shape their own and their city's destiny, and their forebears have shown this in the past. I'll finish my talk with 3 calls to action. These hopefully might give lasting substance to what Coventry Rebooted really means. Firstly, provide a free citizens enterprise hub which welcomes all would-be and could-be entrepreneurs, and also establish a free and ongoing ideation programme that helps to shape those ideas. Secondly, link entrepreneurial academics to all schools and colleges in Coventry to provide expertise, encouragement and support, and at the same time establish a postgraduate teacher enterprise development programme that upskills our future enterprise educators. Finally, to organise a city-wide competition for the big idea with significant and meaningful prizes, and to provide at least 10 £10,000 bursaries to support entrepreneurial future stars with an innovative Coventry rebooted entrepreneurial programme. Actually, that's my first wish list. I'm laying down monitorable and measurable metrics, but there's a couple of other things I think are really important. It's really important that we focus on those already in work, employed or looking to progress. And this is predicated on two core facts. Firstly, that our population is ageing and retirement ages are rising. And secondly, in terms of productivity, we lag behind our global competitors. We have forgotten the rhetoric of lifelong learning, and we need to get it back. Part-time numbers have fallen off a cliff in universities, and that cannot be a good thing. There are many and profound reasons for this. I think universities need to look long and hard at how they can deal with those reasons. As we all live and work longer in a technology-propelled environment, we're going to need to constantly reskill and upskill our workforce and our society. This could create vibrant new markets for universities and something in the future I think they will need. Without this, we will never achieve sustainable improvements in our productivity. We're going to need newly designed anytime, any place, any pace access to learning that's related to work and work experience. For most employees, they now work in small businesses. We need new ways of organising high quality training for those small businesses as they can't do it on their own. And finally, within our universities and colleges, I would like to see enterprise and entrepreneurship engagement rewarded in the same way that research is, encouraging our academics to invest in a clear career pathway that will be so critical to our future well-being. On reflection, this starts to frame a response to the question that Cardinal Newman asked all of those years ago: what are our universities for? The City of Culture 2021 creates an opportunity to reframe an agenda for the next 20 plus years. It gives us the chance to reboot the heart and soul of a grand old city. I hope that during this talk you've learned something new about your city and are perhaps inspired to find something out more by visiting the free museums or looking around the environment about. Doing so will inspire civic pride and engagement and encourage all of you to proudly and loudly say, we're from Coventry and we love our city. Working together we can achieve all of this, and I look forward to seeing the impact as soon as 2022. Thank you very much.